Hey guys, what's happening? So we are back with more Eddie Brock Carnage with issue 2, where in this one, Eddie and Carnage begin their new hunt because Carnage can't get enough and Eddie's gotta do what he's gotta do. So with that said, if you're enjoying these videos, be sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications. Alright, so in our last talk, we learned how Eddie and the Carnage symbiote had an agreement where Eddie agreed to kill, but only if that person was a serial killer or something. And at the time, when it turned out the killer he was looking for just happened to be a pilot, things went left, the plane started going down, and this led to Eddie using the Carnage symbiote to rescue the passengers before the plane crashed. But like we saw when this happened, Eddie blacked out, Carnage took over, and as it stands, Eddie still doesn't know what happened to those passengers. So now Eddie needs to give Carnage what he wants, or better yet, more of what he wants, which just happens to be a list of much more powerful targets. And so coming back, the first thing we see is this crash being investigated by a group of FTSB agents. And with how this is done, these guys are investigating before the local authorities or the FBI, given the fact that this plane crash took place under some very strange circumstances. Because with these guys just getting here, their first impression based on the orientation of the plane on impact is that it still had some power when it came down. So early on it has them thinking it was one of three things: critical system failure, pilot error, or something happened to the pilots. And with the first two being the least likely, they lean towards the third possibility. But eventually, after investigating the crash site for hours, they discover the strangest part about this incident, which is the fact that they haven't found a single body. And following this, the next thing we do is head over to Eddie Brock, who's currently at the 3rd Precinct in Detroit, Michigan, turning himself in under the name of Edwin Black. And he just walks up to the counter like, yeah, I'm here to turn myself in. I'm a killer. And of course, Carnage is in his head like, well, not yet, Eddie. I'd say you're a work in progress, but I believe in you. And so of course, they take Eddie in for questioning, or Edwin, I should say, because claiming to be a killer is something they gotta take serious, under any circumstances. So they let him know that he has a right to an attorney, and if he can't afford one will be provided to him. But Eddie's just like, yeah, don't worry about it. I'm happy to talk. I just don't want to talk to you guys. So he tells them that he'll talk to Detective Chuck Brentwood. So they just tell him like, oh, Detective Brentwood, he left for the day. So why don't you just tell us everything and we'll pass it along. So right there, Eddie's just like, nope, call him. And mind you, Carnage is constantly talking in Eddie's head. So right here, he's just like, you know what? How about you kill these guys? I bet you that detective will show up after that. But Eddie doesn't go for it. He just tells Carnage to shut up so he can do his thing. And following this, for a moment here, we go back to the crash site, where now the agents who are investigating, they've just received the passenger manifest. But to their surprise, the FBI is already looking into it, with them asking for the list as soon as these guys got it. And as it stands, this isn't a huge discovery just yet. But what this lets them know is that someone really important was on that plane. And after this, when we go back to Eddie, it's here where he's met by Detective Chuck Brentwood. Kinda. Cause right away Carnage is like, this dude smells like death. And as soon as he steps in and takes a seat, Eddie tells him that he is not Detective Chuck Brentwood. And he even looks at the camera when he says this. So the detective turns off the camera so they can talk without anyone watching or listening. But one thing to know, even though Eddie just called this guy out by telling him that he's not Detective Brentwood, make no mistake, this is the guy that Eddie's looking for. Or at least one of them, anyway. So Eddie tells him here, choosing Brentwood though, that's cute. Another neighborhood in Los Angeles, very clever. But I'm an investigative journalist. We look for little things like that. I put it together right away. So the guy tells Eddie the camera's off, what happens in here stays in here, he warns him to tread lightly, and he asks what does he want. So Eddie tells him, just what I said to the duty officer. I'm a murderer. I've got a voice in my head, it tells me to do things. Bad things. And it's from here where Eddie goes on to let this guy know everything. And it's kind of funny because even Carnage is surprised at how much information Eddie's given up. But through the course of this, as it turns out, it's helpful for us because Eddie's confession, if you will, it goes on to tell us more about this situation between him and Carnage. But right out the gate, Eddie tells this guy that the thing in his head is an alien called a symbiote. So Eddie asks if he's ever heard of anything like that. So the detective tells him, buddy, I've heard all kinds of crazy garbage in this room. Maybe I did hear about those things once. In another life, what about him? And that's where Eddie tells him that he has the Carnage symbiote. So right away Carnage is bugging like, Eddie, you snitching on me? So in his head, host to symbiote, Eddie tells Carnage to be patient and he'll get what he wants. But at this point, it's like the Carnage symbiote is having withdrawals, like it needs to kill. So it tells Eddie, I need it. But once again, Eddie's got a plan here. So he goes on to tell the detective, I've got experience with these things. For a long time, I was bonded with one called Venom. It's very powerful. I tried to use it to do good. And you know, this whole time Carnage is in Eddie's head like, okay, But Eddie goes on saying, "You wouldn't believe the things I did. I was something like a god for a while. The king in black, but I lost that. My kid too. Everything I had. I don't hold on to things too well. After I lost Venom, I had this chance to bond with this other symbiote I mentioned, Carnage. That one's a bad seed. If Venom was a god, Carnage is the devil. Carnage got hurt in the same fight that made me lose Venom. There is this spear, and it doesn't matter. Carnage was dying. It needed a host. I was hurt too. I wouldn't be able to stop it from taking someone else, an innocent. I have experience with symbiotes. I thought better for me to bond with it than anyone else." And that's where the detective's like, "So this was a noble sacrifice?" And Eddie tells him, "Not entirely. I knew bonding with a symbiote would heal my injuries. I didn't want to die. And being with a symbiote, to call it a rush, doesn't do it justice. I'd lost so much. I wanted a taste of my old life, even if it was with Carnage. Neither of us realized just how damaged Carnage was. It's not as independent. All its powers are mine. I control them. Carnage can only do two things on its own. It can talk to me. It does that a lot." And I mean, right here, the detective, he's on the edge of his seat. So he's like, "What's the second thing? I gotta know." So Eddie tells him, "It can kill me. Snap of a finger. Bang. I'm dead." Killing is all Carnage cares about. It needs it, like a drug. The situation was clear. If I didn't give Carnage death, it would kill me instead. So we made a deal. I kill someone every so often, and it leaves me alive. I just have to find the right kind of people. Deaths I can live with. So of course, when the detective hears that, he's like, "Right kinds of deaths? Like, what does that mean?" So Eddie tells him, "Serial killers. Like I said, I'm an investigative journalist. For a long time, killers were my beat. I find monsters and use Carnage's abilities to take them down. As long as I keep feeding it deaths, it mostly leaves me alone up here. But we both know if one of them ever kills me, Carnage will jump over and take them as its new host. Carnage likes that. This whole thing is like a game, designed to make sure Carnage has the strongest, deadliest host. It was working, kind of. But now it's getting complicated. I've got missing time. It seems like Carnage can take the wheel, blank me out. There was this airplane, hundreds of passengers. I think maybe Carnage killed them. Or I did. Anyway, you starting to put it together yet, Detective Brentwood? Why I'm here? I mean, it's nice to talk about all this to someone, but that's not the only reason." And this is where we start to get down to business, because the detective tells him, "What I'm putting together is that you're just another sad maniac wasting my time. I had plans tonight." And that's where Eddie's like, "Yeah? Like spending time with another homeless person your officers brought in? Some poor soul you can get released into your custody? Someone you'd take to your soundproof basement and work out your own awful impulses on? Someone no one would miss." Cameras off, Detective Brentwood. Or is it Detective Burbank? Or is it Bushwhacker? Because remember before when Carnage and Eddie had that talk about chasing down more powerful targets, Bushwhacker was on that list. So by turning himself in under a fake name, just to get himself alone in the room with Detective Chuck Brentwood, Eddie knew this was gonna bring Carl Burbank right to him. So after Eddie calls him out, Bushwhacker still has his hands under the table, but suddenly one of them arms starts getting real big. And I can only imagine that sounds crazy to the people who are just listening to the audio. And if that's you, don't worry, it's not as crazy as it sounds. But with Carl's arm getting bigger, he pulls his hand out from under the table and he busts a hot one right at Eddie. So for a while, these two guys are in the room going at it. But we step away from that situation for a moment to head over to the FBI Denver field office, where now these guys are trying to scrape together whatever information they have on the plane crash. Because at any moment, a special agent from the Aberrant Crimes Division is going to be showing up and they got to have something for her. So one of them pulls up a name from the passenger manifest for Mr. Elmer Blank, who has a real ID but no history going back further than a week. And when the special agent gets there, we find out that it's Misty Knight. And the reason why the importance of this whole investigation was escalated is because her cousin was working as the air marshal on that flight before it went down. So they fill in Misty on the information they've gathered so far, as they pull up footage of the mysterious passenger on their screens. And as soon as Misty looks at the screen, she pulls a Leonardo DiCaprio, because she's like, that mystery man is Eddie Brock. Like, she recognizes his face immediately. So these guys are like, "Are you sure?" So she tells them, "Yup. And if Eddie Brock is involved in this, we're in trouble." And speaking of Eddie, who's currently going toe-to-toe with Bushwhacker, now that we know more about this arrangement between Eddie and Carnage, where it's like a kill or be killed kind of thing, in a way it makes it make more sense as far as why Eddie would want to kill Bushwhacker, which would be one, to keep Carl from killing other people, but also there's an element of self-preservation to it. But just going back to some of the others we saw on that list, outside of people like Bushwhacker, Bullseye, or Fool Killer, I'm curious to see Eddie's reasoning for hunting down the others. Because if you think about it, everyone on that list is guilty for killing. But nonetheless, when Eddie knocks Bushwhacker out of this room, and all the other officers from the Detroit precinct see him, they're looking at him like, Detective Brentwood, what happened to you? Because they didn't know Bushwhacker's secret prior to this. But now that they do, he just starts slaughtering these guys left and right. And this just has Carnage like, oh Eddie, look what you did. And I can just imagine seeing this has only made Bushwhacker a more desirable host to Carnage. But at the same time, would Carnage want to give up Eddie for Bushwhacker? Because I mean, sure, Bushwhacker's a ruthless killer, but I also think Carnage enjoys playing with Eddie's mind, and he still gets kills with Eddie on top of that. Either way, let me know what you guys think in the comments. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.